there are concerns that weapons left behind in Afghanistan potentially made their way to Hamas and were used in what's currently going on right now between Israel and Hamas, the specifically Gaza Strip. What are your thoughts on that? You think that's possible or plausible?
Yeah, a couple of things. One is look, I'm old enough that I remember when we were told that the next thing we have to do now that we've gotten the Soviets, the old Soviets out of Afghanistan back in the day, was to go back in and try to clean up and collect all those stingers that
good luck with that
had helped the Mujahideen get rid of the Soviets. And so now we're worried that some of those that could be back in service in the Middle East. It all kind of goes around and comes around, I guess. But yeah, I see it as possible. I spent some time dealing in the gray arms market. No, I didn't. I wasn't dealing in it. We were addressing the problems in the gray arms market, and it's robust, as you know. And so the idea that you could get gear moved around the world to various hotspots, and the idea that there may be liaison officers in between some of these groups. Look, whether it's Al Qaeda and the Sinaloa cartel, or whether it's ISIS and Islamic Jihad or whomever, there are contacts. It's they don't all completely operate in a bubble. So yeah, I think it is a possibility. I think a lot of what they do is homegrown. That comes from the training and the technical support that they get from Iran. Iran's the biggest problem, and as far as I'm concerned, the current administration, not to get overly political, but they seem to be at pains to say that Iran is responsible for Hamas, in part because they've been so keen to get back into a deal with Iran. I think they're afraid of the optic of spending 3 years or so being soft on Iran in a sense, and now Iran being responsible for this atrocity and this war that's building.
Yeah, it's having spent a good amount of my life bouncing back and forth, between Afghanistan and Iraq. I don't think people realize actually how, from a geographic perspective, how closely located a lot of these countries are. The neighboring, Iran, where it sits, Pakistan on the eastern side of Afghanistan, and continuing west, and you're going to eventually arrive, in Israel and in the Gaza Strip as well. And I also don't think people realize the undescribable amount of equipment and infrastructure that we left behind in Afghanistan, whether it be arming our partner force at the time or our allies at the time, however you would want to phrase it. I personally witnessed that, from them going from basically being unarmed to moderately well equipped. I wouldn't say necessarily a first world army, but probably knocking at the door at that. And then can you, from your, I have a literal boots on the ground understanding of both of those countries, not an operational or strategic level understanding by any stretch. I don't claim that. But could you paint a picture of what was left when we actually pulled out of Afghanistan? I'm curious as to your thoughts on how we actually, the execution of said withdrawal.
Yeah. As by way of a couple of examples, we got into Iraq in just at the very outset in 2003 of our, moving in there, and in part because at the time we were doing some work on behalf of some what would become infrastructure companies, right? That were out in Iraq for years. And we've been doing some work on their behalf elsewhere. And so anyway, we ended up there at the very outset. And, it was striking, even before things turned to shit, back in September or so of 2003, when you could start to see it getting sideways. You could stroll into any open air market and buy an amazing array of hardware, right? And this was, this was early days in Iraq, and it was surprising, at that point, because you felt like, okay, well, it's the Wild West in a sense, but it got worse down the road. It wasn't quite as open, but it was like going into Walmart and being able to buy just about anything that you wanted on the military hardware side.
So, first of all, I guess the point of that story is that in that part of the world, gear is just is available. It just floats around. It's like trading in a commodity, right? And nobody finds it surprising because there's so much conflict. There's so much tribal, conflict that goes on as on one level.